It's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about my topic. I'd like to begin with some facts. Many students lack motivation and make little progress in learning. Many other students show enthusiasm in the classroom and learn the language well. And another pair. Sometimes, no matter how much we prepare our material, our classes are unsuccessful. In fact, sometimes we can experience the magic of seeing deep and lasting learning going on in our classes. And today I'm going to be exploring with you why I feel that the difference between each pair of facts has to do with our topic, affect in language learning. Affect refers to a wide range of phenomena that have to do with emotions, moods, dispositions, and preferences. Research tells us that in classes where affective aspects are taken into consideration, students have higher self-concept, achieve more academically, cause fewer discipline problems. This is nothing new. In this school, almost 100 years ago, these students learned very much and were very pleased with their teacher. And I know this because the one below the heart was my father. And many years ago, I was listening to him talk all the time about his teacher and how they learned so well from her. And so one day I asked him, well, why do you think this was? And he thought for a moment and told me, well, I think it's because she cared a lot for us. And she really worked to help us learn. Now, several centuries ago, Aristotle told us, educating the mind without educating the heart is not educating at all. Joseph Ledoux says the mind without affect isn't really mind at all. And the well-known Spanish neuroscientist, Francisco Mora, in his book, tells us without emotion, there's no curiosity, no attention, no memory, and no learning. Now, true or false? Teaching is the same as learning? These fellows tell us something. One who has a little dog says to his friend, I taught Spot, the dog, how to whistle. The friend says, I can't hear him whistling. But then he says, I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. So teaching and learning are not exactly the same. Now, here is a typical class where the teacher is in control of everything in front. He doesn't pay much attention to his students. He just says what he has to teach. And some of the students are looking bored and others almost asleep. Here is a different class where everyone is active, everyone is participating. And this has to do with the results from an important World Innovation Summit for Education, where they discussed what schools will be like in 2030. And two of the main ideas they offered were these: teacher-fronted classes, like the first one we saw with the man there, will disappear, and the teacher's main objective will be to guide students in their own learning process. And another point, students will interact with each other and with the teacher in a process of collaborative learning. Now, Dr. Zoll tells us teaching is the art of changing the brain. But to change our students' brains, first we have to connect with their brains. And some of the main keys for connecting with the brain of the learners are things that make the learner feel comfortable and be interested. And all of these things in each of these points have to do with affect in language learning. A very important quotation for us was from Professor Earl Steven. Many years ago, he was one of the founders in the science of teaching foreign languages. And he told us, success in language learning depends less on materials, techniques, and linguistic analysis, Not that they're not important, but success depends more on what goes on inside and between the people in the classroom. And here he's defining what affect is in language learning. The two things, inside refers to individual factors, motivation, anxiety, learning style, self-concept, etc. And between, relational factors, between teacher and students and between students. And this is also a point in the very important European document, the Common European Framework of Reference, where they discuss the competences that need to be dealt with. And the existential competence includes all of these things which are very related to affect. And it states explicitly, these factors are very important as they affect not only the language users, learners' roles in communicative acts, but also their ability to learn. Now, we can ask ourselves, what does this have to do with our classes? Well, we can look at a couple of activities now. One is a typical textbook activity where the students in pairs talk to the person next to you, and they have to imagine they're in a pet shop, and one is the shop assistant, and the other wants to buy a tropical fish, asks how much it costs, etc. If we analyze these according to the characteristics of a good activity, it has personal meaning for students, unless they have a tropical fish, none. It takes into consideration mind, yes, because they have to construct their sentences correctly in the language, but emotions in the body, nothing. It offers choice, very little. It improves the classroom dynamics, helps learners get to know each other, nothing. So we can compare this to another activity by Gertrude Moskowitz that she suggests can be used in the classroom. This is called FIRE. Here you tell your students, when you go home today, your house is on fire. Everything is burning, but fortunately your family is safe. Your plants, your tropical fish, all safe. But there's a fireman in the window and he tells you, the house is going to fall right away. I only have time to save one thing from your house. If you want me to save something, what do you want me to save? So they each think of all of the things in their house that they have, what they would save because it's most important. They tell the person next to them what they would save, and then the two of them get up and each one tells other people what their partner would save. If we analyze this according to the characteristics of a good activity, it fulfills all of them completely. So sometimes we can introduce a good activity like this for our students. I like this quotation by Parker Palmer. He says, technique is what the teacher uses until the real teacher is there. And to know and to do is part of being a good teacher, but above all, to be how we are with our students. And I also find very interesting the model of evolution in teaching languages by Adrian Underhill. He tells us first, lecturers can begin to teach because they know the language, but things don't always go well, so they study and they learn methods. Then they become what Underhill calls teachers, who have a knowledge of methods, but things still are not always very successful. So they keep studying, they keep working, they talk to people, they go to conferences, they reflect on this, and they become what Underhill considers facilitators, who also have knowledge of ways to create a psychological atmosphere which helps high quality learning. And this includes the consideration of what happens inside and between the people in the classroom. Now, how do we get to be a real teacher or facilitator? There are many steps, but we're just going to look at 3 of these today. The first one, after a class that didn't go well, what would you do? Complain to your colleagues, get in a bad mood, blame the weather, eat chocolate? Will these reactions help you? No. What can help? Our first suggestion, reflection. This involves, think of something that didn't go well. Remember all the details and think of different explanations for what happened. And decide what could be changed so things would go better another time. A second step has to do with this. The empathy, which is defined in English as sometimes as putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to understand others. And this can be important for us as teachers to try to understand our students, not just judge them, but to try to have empathy, to understand them. An activity in one of my books related to this, here I give students a card like this, and each one just writes their name, nothing else. Then they exchange them with the partner next to them, and the other person tries to be empathic with them and to answer the questions as they think their partner would. Then they exchange their cards again, and they enjoy this very much. Also, I like to teach the language of empathy in classroom, give them vocabulary for this, for positive situations, how wonderful, really good, I'm so happy, and for negative situations, oh dear, I'm so sorry, it's how awful, things like that. So they can use this in situations where they can use empathy. And we can do a little activity with this. I give each one a different card with 2 good things on it and 2 bad things. They choose one of these, either good or bad, and they invent that this is something that's happened, and they talk about this with one of their partners, and then their partner gives them empathic responses. Now, a third option, a third step has to do here with an English conversation class in Seville. See what you think the important mistake is here in this conversation class. Maria says, what did you do last weekend? I go to a party and met George Clooney. No, I went to a party. What did you do last weekend, Pedro? What do you think the really important mistake is? Obviously, Maria made a mistake with the verb, but in a conversation class where she had met before George Clooney and she could talk about this famous actor with the other students, this would have been very important for conversation. But all the teacher was doing is just correcting a verb, which you could do at any other point. So our third suggestion here is active listening. To do, empathize, listen with attention to what the speaker is saying, show interest and understanding, and stay with the speaker. Don't interrupt. I like the ideogram for the Chinese verb for to listen, which includes these elements: ear, you, eyes, undivided attention, and heart. I think that gives us a good idea what it means to really listen. Okay, now look at these 2 things that Stevek mentions for us. First, let's start with between the people. Learning is first intermental, between minds that interact, according to Vygotsky. A learning community, then, is where students know and respect each other. There's interaction among them. They share goals. There are opportunities for social contact, as well as for getting linguistic information. And this can be important for establishing a learning community and for learning well. Now, Professor Brumfitt tells us that to use the new language in class, learners pay attention to many things. They pay attention to the language, but also to personal needs and social needs. But one teacher might say, but why am I going to worry about other things? I teach grammar, vocabulary, etc., and that is enough. But to this teacher, I would ask, do you really want your students to learn the language? If you do, you need to pay attention also to other things. Reasons to be connected about language, but also about what goes on between the people in the classroom are that alert yet relaxed students learn better, and students find it easier to speak in an emotionally secure atmosphere and to learn to speak the language they need to speak. Now, Civic tells us teaching is centered on the learners, of course, but the teachers are the main figures in each classroom, because they are who create the interpersonal atmosphere. Now, as teachers, we are part of the group, and sometimes it can be useful to share something about ourselves with our students. One thing I like to do towards the beginning of each class is the activity I called secrets, which are true but not obvious, and lies. I put a list of things on the board and I read them. And when I read each one, I ask students to raise their hand if they think it's true. Then I go back over them and tell them which ones are true and which ones are lies. I was born in Las Vegas, true, though I never lived there. I play the guitar for concerts. No, false. I play the guitar a little, but I could never play for a concert. I know Rafa Nadal. False. I've watched him play tennis on television a lot, but I don't know him personally. I've been to the tomb of Elvis Presley. True. I've always had a dishwasher. False. And if I had, I probably wouldn't be here today, but that's a story for another moment. My son works in movies in Spain. True. Now, I like to think of the group, working with the group of students, as something that evolves different points and so I try to have activities that are useful in each point. For example, pleased to meet you, breaking the ice. Good activities for these at the beginning of a course. They help to learn others' names. They have students speaking at least briefly with several others, include personal information, and they reduce anxiety and inhibition. The one I like is this: my name is true, but I tell a lie. Here, I have them sit in a circle and they're going to each tell their name, but they're going to tell a lie. And we're going to hear their names 3 different times, so this is going to help us learn their names. My name is Juan, I fly airplanes. My name is Pedro, yesterday I escaped from prison. My name is Ana, and I'm going to be in a movie with Johnny Depp. Then I have them, the person on their right is going to ask them a question and mention their name. John, where do you fly normally, etc. Then the 3rd time we go around and they're going to say their name again. My name is Juan, and now I tell the truth. I play tennis with my friends. So an activity like this doesn't take up much time, but it does help us to get to know our learners a little bit and to know their names. Now, working together, we can use activities that help the group become a real group. What research says, learning a language is by its nature a collective enterprise, and the process is more effective when the class works as a unified group. One thing I do to help them work together is this. I take very important quotes by famous people, different things that famous people have said, and I print these on different colored pieces of paper. Then I cut them up in little pieces and hand them out as the students come in. And then they have to get together with the other students who have the same colored paper and find a way to present to the rest of the class their quote. And they enjoy this very much. Now, when I have students work in a group, after they finish, sometimes I like to have them find things they have in common. So I give them a list of things such as this. And And they talk for a moment and find a place they like to visit, something they all like to do at the weekend, something they look for in a friend, a goal they have, a positive quality they share. Things like this that are appropriate for the students I have in that group. So they get to know each other a bit more and they share. And this is good for the group. Now, also at the end of the group, the end of the class, the end of the course, rather than just give an exam the last day and say goodbye and that's it all, it's sometimes good to do something to just say goodbye, but with learning a language, we continue. So to consolidate what has been learned and build bridges towards the future. So we can try to create a positive feeling about the efforts made during the course, congratulate the class on their achievement. And the learning process hasn't finished, so consider plans for continuing to learn the language. Now, in which of these classes do you think students would learn best? A or B? Obviously, B has a very better atmosphere. And this has to do with something called teacher confirmation, which according to Professor Ellis is the process by which a teacher communicates to students that they are significant, valued individuals. Research has shown it has an important influence on students' motivation and their learning. And one of my doctoral students at the University of Seville for her thesis interviewed a lot of students, many students, and asked them what kind of things their teachers would do that made them feel comfortable, that made them have this confirming behavior. And some of the most important things were these: transmit feelings of confidence in students, smile, make eye contact, show interest in answering students' questions, take personal interest in students, and listen to students. And these things all led to more motivation for their students. And another one of my students for his master's thesis asked several teachers to let him talk to their students and ask them what made them feel good about the classroom. And the percentages were quite low. But then he told each of the teacher these elements of confirming behavior and asked them to introduce this into their classroom. And then just a few weeks later, he passed the questionnaire again, and the results were much greater than they were to begin with. So confirming behavior can be important for us. Now, anxiety inhibits learning. With speaking or writing, the language doesn't go out so well. And with listening or reading, the language doesn't fit in. Because anxiety affects our neurons. On the left, we see what normal neurons look like, and on the right, what happens when we are stressed. So we should try to reduce anxiety, eliminate what causes it, for example, dealing with our students in a very aggressive way, but sometimes we can also help students deal with it. For example, with exams usually produce some anxiety. So we can help our students by giving them practice exams and helping them with how to prepare for the exams. Now, advantages for working with the group, are these only for students? No, when students are pleased with their learning, we teachers also enjoy our work more. Working with the between, the interpersonal dimension, creating a community of learning can enrich and bring enthusiasm to the life we live in our classes. And as Dornier and Ushilda say, if teachers are motivated to teach, there's a good chance their students will be motivated to learn. Okay, now let's look at inside the person, the individual factors. One of the most important of these, obviously, is the effect of motivation on learning, because motivation to do something leads us to take action to do it, and this will lead to success. And as Chomsky said, no matter, said the truth of the matter is that about 99% of teaching is making students feel interested in the material. Now, does this student look interested in the work with the past tense verbs in English? No, she doesn't. But we could do something quite similar, much more interesting. Here the students have a list of questions they need to find the answers for in a video. And then we're going to play this video. I'm afraid probably the sound doesn't work here. I'll just play a little bit of it. This is a video of a song by the Beatles. In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed the sea. And he told us of his life in the land of submarines. So we sailed up to the sun till we found a sea of green. And we lived beneath this in our yellow submarine. Okay, just a simple activity that doesn't take much time at all, but it can get much more interest for our students. And something that is fundamental in learning, the fun can become before the mental. If there's fun, the mental may be easier. And this is reflected in an activity by Daniel Martin called What Did Lydia Do Yesterday? Working again with the verbs in the past tense. And here what we do, we have one student come in front of the class and not look at the screen. And the rest of the class is going to try to help them figure out what Lydia did by, this is what the rest of the class would see. The person in front of the class wouldn't. So the rest of the class tries to help this person see what Lydia did yesterday. They try to do something to show them this, or Lydia ate spaghetti, or Lydia washed her hair. And they have a lot of fun with this. So a little bit of fun can become before the mental of working with the verbs in the past tense. Now, true or false, students who think they can't learn the language are right, they can't. This is true, they can't, unless they change that belief. Here we're referring to self-concept, how we see ourselves, and self-esteem, how we feel about this. And both of these things greatly influence learning. No one is born with low self-esteem. We're all born with an I'm okay sign on us. But there are many enemies of self-esteem out in the world. And so our students, some students anyway, may come to class with not very good self-esteem. But an interesting project, my colleague from Argentina, Veronica de Andres, which she did for her master's at University in England. She had young students and she was teaching them English, but she also wanted to incorporate activities to learn the language, but to also support the learner's self-esteem. And for her project, she had them draw pictures of themselves. And this student doesn't look very good, doesn't look very happy, does he? And this student is quite different, looks very happy. But the thing is, it's the same student at the beginning and after she had worked with self-esteem in the classroom as she taught them English. And he wrote at the bottom, I learned that I am special. Now, Robert Reasoner has a model of 5 components of self-esteem that can be used in the classroom: security, identity, belonging, purpose, and competence. This can be incorporated into our classroom. And Veronica, Andres, and I use this in our book, Seeds of Confidence. And these activities, the sense of security, this leads to confidence based on physical security and emotional security. And students with a sense of security feel more comfortable, take more risks, and can concentrate their energy on the task. They participate more. Now, how we deal with mistakes can influence students' sense of security. Correcting a mistake aggressively can contribute to their belief that they can't learn. Or if we do it well, it could open a window to learning and give them confidence. And to take away the fear of making mistakes, I like to do this activity. I take a series of quotes, of 8 or 9, 10, and put them on a piece of paper on the wall and have students walk around and look at each of these quotations about mistakes by important authors. So there are 8, 9, 10 of these up on the walls, and I have students walk around and choose the one they like the best. And with the other students who choose the same quote, they're going to tell each other a time they made a mistake about something in their lives. And to start out, I tell them about a mistake I made, and it's true. One day when my children were very small, I was always very, very busy. And one day I got to class and I noticed that I had one shoe that was brown and one that was black, but also one had a heel like this and the other a heel like that. And that was true. And so with an activity like this, I try to help them not feel afraid of making mistakes. Sense of identity. Don Quixote said to Sancho Panza in the famous novel, "You must keep in view what you are, striving to know yourself, the most difficult thing that the mind can imagine." This is a sense of identity, the knowledge I have of myself. It is knowing who I am and who I can become. It includes a realistic vision of my strengths and my areas to develop. Teachers who promote the sense of identity celebrate the uniqueness of individuals, promote the development of a positive self-concept, show acceptance of students and interest in them as people, and help students recognize their strengths and their points to be developed. An activity related to this I like to do in groups of 3 or 4. I give them each a card like this, and they have to take a coin and toss the coin. And if it lands heads, they move 1 box, or tails 2. And where they land, they have to tell the rest of the group something about that, a goal I have, I'm thankful for, a positive trait I have, a good friend of mine, whatever. And then the next person does the same, and they continue until they go to the end of the card. The sense of belonging exists when we feel accepted in a group, and our brain is social. We need to connect with others in an atmosphere of respect to learn most effectively. Teachers who promote the sense of belonging create a climate of acceptance, support interpersonal relations in the class. The sense of competence is knowing that if we work, we can reach our goals. Teachers who promote the sense of competence offer options or alternatives, provide incentives and support, and give feedback, and celebrate achievements. They teach for success. With activities like this, we can plant seeds of confidence. These things are important because classes with anxiety, without motivation, without active participation, without personal meaning for students, are classes without learning. Now, I like this quotation by Professor Leer van Leer. Using only the textbook greatly limits your capacity to participate in innovative and creative teaching. And David Block tells us, students appreciate teachers who carefully prepare their classes, and the use of your own materials shows clear evidence of preparation. And in my methodology class and my workshops for teachers, I always stress the importance of sometimes including even just a small activity that we create for our students. This isn't much work, and it doesn't take a lot of time. We still can get through our textbook, but just a little activity of our own that may be fun can help the students have more attention. Now, there's not only one recipe for learning. Not everyone learns the same way because brains are different. So there are advantages to working with different ways to learn. Greater interest and relevance in what we teach, increase of students' responsibility for their own learning. And a model that's very important by Howard Gardner at Harvard University is multiple intelligences. And he points out there are multiple ways to learn related to different things: visual, spatial, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and so forth. And we can incorporate these into our classes. For example, one important one is the bodily kinesthetic intelligence, because we all have three parts to ourselves: cognitive, our brain; affective, our feelings; but physical, also our body. And sometimes we need to move a little bit to learn. In an important newspaper here in Spain, there was an article about the importance of movement for the brain, because it produced more intense brain activity, more oxygen to the brain, more connections between neurons, and better concentration. So more learning. Now, one thing I like to do for this, in class, one day I go in and I tell my students, today we have an important exam. They're all afraid because I hadn't warned them about this. But then I begin and I say, our first question is this: if you were born where you live now, raise your right hand. Somewhere else, raise your left hand. And they have to do this, so they're moving a little bit. If for your summer vacation, you want to go to the beach, look up. If you want to go somewhere else, look down. If you want to go both places, look up and down. Now, if today is Wednesday, stand up. Fourth question: if you would enjoy more going out with friends to a party rather than going to the dentist to have a tooth pulled, sit down. So with an activity like this, they're doing a little bit of movement. It doesn't take time, but it can get them in a better state for continuing to learn. Another thing that I feel is important here is what I call go for a walk. Like the activity we saw before about the mistakes, or this one, I know what you're thinking. Here I put up a series of photos of people on the wall, and I have them walk around and look at these and choose one without telling anyone which one they chose, and think of something that the person might be thinking. Then they sit down, and each one of them says their sentence to the rest of the class. For example, someone might say, I wonder if it's going to rain. And they might say, it might be 4, it might be 8. Or, I wonder if my football team won the game yesterday. Okay, that would be 5. Okay, so here they've moved a little and worked a little with the language. Now, one last thing One of Gardner's intelligences that can be very useful in the classroom is a visual spatial intelligence. This can help us because if we give students something to look at, it's much easier for them to use the language. For example, here, we could show two pictures and have them with another person discuss what things are similar and what things are different about the pictures. Now, if I asked you what all of these famous people in the arts and the sciences had in common, one thing would be they all, in their creative process, used images, mental images. Aristotle said it is impossible to think without images. And John Dewey tells us the image is the great instrument of instruction. What learners get out of any subject is merely the images they themselves form in regard to it. And Damasio tells us a condition that is necessary for the mind is the ability to create images internally and to order these images in the process called thought. So activating mental imagery is having different sensory experiences without an external stimulus, seeing with the mind's ear, seeing with the mind's eye, hearing with the mind's ear, etc. This can be useful with the learner and the learning process. For example, memory. According to Alan Pivio, a language needs to be learned and associated with nonverbal reference, visible or in images, which represent knowledge of the world. And this is why it's easier to learn a word if we associate it with what it really represents, rather than the word in our native language. But for example, with trees, there are not often trees in our classrooms, so learners can associate them with a mental image, and it will be much easier to learn that way. Zoltan Dornier, expert on motivation, tells us, I consider the concept of the ideal self the strongest and most versatile mechanism for motivation. When we imagine our ideal self, how we would like to be, it helps us to formulate goals for our future and to reach them, to create these images of how we would like to see ourselves. And Doug Brown has what he calls a visualization game for his students. Imagine yourself speaking the language fluently and interacting with people. Then, when you are actually in such a situation, you will, in a sense, have been there before. Our materials. Charles and Jill Hadfield tell us, if you don't have access to a lot of materials, and I would say even if you do, use the limitless resource of students' imagination. Simply get the students to close their eyes and imagine their own pictures, which become the stimulus for speaking or writing activities. For example, we could do this. We could tell our students, close your eyes and imagine Mary is looking out the window. She sees it is raining. It is raining very hard. Some people are running, others have umbrellas. She watches the people go by, but no one comes to her door, to her house. So after a while, she goes in and sits down on her sofa and just sits there thinking and thinking. Suddenly, the door opens and Charles comes in. Okay, when they have had time to think about this, then we can ask them questions, and their answers are all going to be okay because they're what they saw in their images. How old is Mary? What was Mary wearing? What happened when Charles came in? And so forth. Now, the areas of language, for example, with vocabulary, we can use mental images. And here's an activity I've used with my students several times at the University of Seville. In class, we've studied vocabulary for animals, their habitats, things like that. And I tell them to close their eyes and imagine they see a little dog running around in front of them. They watch for a while, and the front stays a dog, but the back becomes a cat. They continue watching this run around, and after a while, they see the back stays a cat, but the front becomes a monkey. Then I tell them to change, keep changing until they find a new animal that they really enjoy. If they have any trouble, I show them these images from one of my books. And then I have them get together in a group of 4 or 5. Each one tells the new animal they thought of, and they choose one of these, the one that the whole group likes the best. And then they develop a presentation for it for a scientific community, which is going to be the rest of the class. So they make a drawing, they decide on what it likes to do, what it eats, where it lives, and so forth. And here their mental images have given them a very interesting activity. Now with grammar, also we can use mental images. I have students here make a list of things about their childhood. For example, their favorite toy, their favorite food, where they like to go on holidays, what they did after school, etc. To get a list of things from the childhood. And then with the person next to them, they ask each other, and here they're working again with verbs in the past tense. And they ask each other, for example, remember your childhood and tell me about your favorite toy, tell me about what you like to do after school, and so forth. And again, since I like to share something about me with my students, I share them. I bring in my doll Ginny, who is very, very old now, and she has clothes that my mother made for her. And I show her to my students. So I've shared a little something with them. Okay, now with the 4 skills, we can also work with mental images. Brian Tomlinson tells us, if students don't see mental images of what they read, it will be difficult for them to get a good understanding of the text, and their experience of it will be superficial. When writing, sometimes a teacher may say, take a piece of paper and write a text, but the reactions might be, I don't know what to write. The blank sheet of paper scares me. But if we work with mental images first to give them some ideas about things to write, the use of mental images can help to overcome the fear of the blank sheet of paper and lead to more interest and confidence and more creative writing. Now, as for speaking, an activity I like to use from one of my books, speaking a new you. Here, I give them a list of things. They're going to create a new person. They're going to create a new name for themselves, a new age, formal education, job, family, etc. A list of different things about themselves. They're going to create a new self. Then I'm going to have them come in front of the classroom in pairs. Each pair will come and will sit down with their partner. And since I tell them, since you are on an airplane and it's a cheap airplane, there are no movies, not even any magazines. So all you can do is talk to the person next to you. So they talk to the person next to them in their new self. And the rest of the class is just fascinated listening to them. One other activity working with images, both for the teacher and the students, is an activity which is called Once Upon a Time. And here the idea, the teacher starts out once upon a time, and the students, one student thinks of something, imagines something and says a word, king. Okay, so then the teacher has to bring this into his mind and think of something, get a mental image related. Once upon a time, there was a king. He was happy. Plane. He was happy because his wife had a plane, a little red plane. So students then think of something else, cow. The teacher again has to think, cow. But one day the king and his wife were flying in the plane, but they saw a cow that was crying. It was very sad. And then this goes on. Okay, one last thing. I feel it's important to incorporate sometimes values in the classroom. So I give students a list of different values. I do this after different values. I do this after I've reviewed with them how to introduce yourself to another person. And then I have them take their first name and take the quality that they choose, the quality that they're really interested in, and use it as their last name. And then they go to someone out, they get up and walk out of class and go to someone and they shake their hand and say, my name is, and I would, to demonstrate, my name is Jane Patience. Okay. Now, the last thing today, one last image. I'd like you to imagine teaching the best class possible. Everyone is so happy. All the students have learned so much and they've enjoyed it very much. And when they get up, many of them walk by your desk and they say, thank you so much. We really enjoyed your class today. We learned a lot. Imagine, and it can happen. The end, this is the end of our session today. I hope it's just the beginning of many new adventures in the classroom. Thank you for attending our webinar, for being here today.